All right, good afternoon. I'm Amy Snyder from the Connect and Communicate Series Planning Committee. Thank you for joining us for You're Wrong About Student Digital Literacy. This discussion will be recorded and it will be made available to Pennsylvania Library Association College and Research Division members through the PALA CRD YouTube channel, as well as sent to registrants and available on the CRD blog. For this discussion, you will only need a headset and speakers. We encourage you to ask questions in the chat box at the bottom right throughout the discussion as you think of them, and we'll address them at the end of the session. We'll also do our best to assist participants with technical issues. Please post those issues in the chat box as well. This session is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Library Association College and Research Division's Connect and Communicate series. I'd like to thank the CRD board for supporting the Connect and Communicate initiative and the other Connect and Communicate Planning Committee members, including Andrea Pritt, Adam Balchunas, Christy Alderman-Ritter, and Ronalise Choco. Please contact any one of the team for information about becoming a PALA member. This project is made possible by a grant from the Institute of Museum and Library Services as administered by the Pennsylvania Department of Education through the Office of Commonwealth Libraries and the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro, Governor. And finally, I'd like to thank and introduce our presenters for today's event. Carmen Cole is the Information Sciences and Business Liaison Librarian at Penn State University Libraries, University Park. Emily Moras is the Business Librarian and Outreach Coordinator at Penn State University Libraries, Harrisburg. Andrea Pritt is the STEM Librarian and Data and Collections Coordinator at Penn State University Libraries, Harrisburg. So welcome, and with that, I turn the presentation over to our presenters.
Okay, welcome to You're Wrong About Student Digital Literacy. I'm Carmen Cole. I am the Information Sciences and Business Librarian at University Park. I will be presenting with my colleagues, Emily Moras and Andrea Pritt. The link to our slides is going to be in the chat below. And you may find this to be a more accessible option for participating in the session today. And let's see. Okay, Emily will probably be dropping that pretty soon here. And could I get the next slide, please? All right, there's that link. All right, before we start our presentation, we would like to acknowledge that the Pennsylvania State University campuses are located on the original homelands of the Erie, Haudenosaunee, Seneca, Cayuga, and Onondaga, Oneida, Mohawk, and Tuscarora, Lenape, Delaware Nation, Delaware Tribe, Stockbridge, Muncie, Shawnee, Absentee, Eastern, and Oklahoma, Susquehannock, and Wazazi, Osage Nations. As a land-grant institution, we acknowledge and honor the traditional caretakers of these lands and strive to understand and model their responsible stewardship. We also acknowledge the longer history of these lands and our place in that history. To learn more about the Indigenous peoples past and present of Penn State or Pennsylvania, we've included two resources for you to consult. So the first is Penn State's guide to our land acknowledgement, and the second is a guide from the Penn State University Libraries with many resources on the Indigenous peoples of Pennsylvania. All right, can I have the next slide, please? All right, so today we will identify digital literacy knowledge gaps that may impede students' academic performance at undergraduate and graduate levels, discuss how born digital assumptions lead to these gaps and how to counteract them with instruction and resources. And we will end with suggestions and the encouragement to evaluate existing lessons and resources for opportunities to incorporate and build students' digital literacy skills. So I'll turn it over to Emily.
Okay, thank you. And we did see in the chat, we need to update the slide access. So we will take care of that. Just give us a minute. We're going to start with an activity here that I'm going to put in the chat. If you happen to participate in this activity before, don't tell everybody what to do, even if you know. So if you haven't used Padlet previously, I'm putting that in the chat. You can also do this with your phone. So you can scan the QR code on your screen and that will take you to our Padlet. So once you open up that Padlet page, there will be a couple of questions and you're just going to click the plus button under the question to add your response. And that will go on anonymously. Your name won't show up. So if doesn't turn out the way that you're expecting it to, you don't have to be concerned or embarrassed about your answers. So we'll just leave this up for another second more. And then if Andrea, you can open up the Padlet so we can see the responses as we come in. I'm going to give everybody about 5 minutes to do this activity. And while you are doing that, we will make sure to get the slide access updated. So I'm going to set my timer and then I will fix those slides for you all. Andrea, can you open the Padlet link?
Yes, I will stop my share and pull up that slide. Yep. Can folks see the Padlet screen?
Yep.
Great.
And sorry about the delay on the slides. Google is giving me a very spinny, slow wheel at the moment. So we'll get them fixed. Carmen, I don't know if your Google Drive might be working better than mine, but mine is still spinning. If you can try to update the slide link to share.
I can also try to do that once I switch out of the Padlet.
Okay, thanks. So it looks like most people are finding it from Google. You can feel free to use any library resources you also might have at your disposal, but if Google is the easiest, that is also fine. About 90 seconds left. Oh, I see Ibis World in there. Okay. I'm interested if Ibis World gave anyone a different answer than 20%. We'll talk about that soon.
All right, I see the anonymous animals popping into the slides, so I'm going to assume it works, but if you're still having problems, just put something in the chat and we'll try to troubleshoot again.
Thanks, because mine just told me to try a different browser. So, all right, we've got 30 seconds left. We'll see if anybody else finds anything different. So it looks like Russ was looking in IBIS World. I'm not familiar with this bell ring brands report. That'll be something new to try out later. All right, and now that you've done that little activity, we have a second one for you to just try out quickly. I want to know what your experience was like doing this activity. So same kind of experience, you can go to that Padlet and share in the columns what your experience was like trying to find that information with a time constraint and minimal instructions from me. So was it easy or difficult to find the information that I was asking you for? And if you could share a little bit about why, and what might have made this easier for you in this process. Also, in your classroom, if your students don't have the right technology to participate, what are you going to do? So I'm just gonna, we'll put 3 minutes on this one. And I know we got a comment in the registration that hoping that this would be like the You're Wrong About podcast. We are You're Wrong About listeners. So we're going to try to debunk here a little bit today. The idea that everyone born after a certain time, or even everyone that's just in college, has the same level of digital literacy skills, the same level of technology skills and understanding, and the same levels of technology access as you do. I think that that is a mind frame that we slip into sometimes, myself included, as we go along here. We're all three of us are going to talk about really incorrect assumptions that we've made about our students during our time as librarians, and kind of the realizations that we had that made us come to the conclusion that we were wrong and what we've tried to do to make a change there. Andrew, if you get a second, can you put up the reflection slide?
Yep, I will do that now. Thanks, Emily.
We're about halfway through our reflection time. So if you're still adding some comments, feel free to keep doing that. So I see some different experiences popping up here. Some people said that they, Googled and it was easy. And since everyone found that same answer, it kind of seems like the implication that it is the right answer. But others saw, oh no, maybe I'm going to have to pay for something that's popping up here. I'm not going to get this information free, or I'm not sure that it's necessarily going to be credible because, I just did a Google search and your mileage may vary there on the accuracy. And those paywalls, our students run into that issue a lot of the time and think that incorrectly that they might need to pay for that information when we do have resources available through the library that can help them. Also, some people have had issues with Padlet. So some people can't open QR codes on their phone. Some people had trouble putting the information into the Padlet. I guess maybe you do know what a NAICS code is, but you don't know the NAICS code for the industry that Premier Protein was looking for, didn't know the resource type. If we're in our instruction lab, this might have been easier. We can provide technology and make them fully aware of the resources. Okay, so we're out of time. And yeah, I appreciate the scrolling there, Andrea, because for some reason my computer is just not liking the internet at the moment. So I can't open the Padlet on my own computer. So I'm having my own technology problems. But I didn't walk everyone through what I was asking you to do. So I will let you know that I got my number through a database called Mintel. So if you teach marketing research and you do happen to have access to Mintel, that's one of my favorite databases for finding niche data at the brand level. So as reported by someone on the Padlet, Premier Protein is part of Post Holdings, that is their parent company, and the market share in 2021 was 21.2, according to Mintel. So the Google number was close, but it wasn't necessarily as close as Mintel. Gave you a bit more of a round figure than Mintel did. And someone in the chat is asking which Mintel. So this is in the Mintel reports section of the database, and it is the Nutrition Drinks US 2022 report, and it is under market share by brand. So if you happen to have Mintel at your institution, that is something that you can look up and verify. And Statista also possibly that might be there. But we don't have Statista at Penn State. We have Mintel. So I know sometimes students will do a Google and they'll find some free Statista links online, which could be helpful for them, but they're going to get cut off at a certain point for Penn State because we don't have that as a database. Andrea, we can go back to the slides. Okay, so I wanted to share a little bit about the background of how we got interested in this topic and why we care about it. I'm going to make a bold assumption. I could be wrong, but I'm going to assume that most of us here in our previous lives, probably when we were in elementary, middle, high school, have used a floppy disk. And when you have to use floppy disks, and even sometimes with flash drives, but those have also kind of gone out of fashion. We just had a conversation about that at my library yesterday, that we don't really need as many of those as we used to because people are just saving everything to the cloud now. You could understand and needed to understand a file path because it was pretty important to make sure that whatever you were trying to save wasn't just going to go to the desktop of the computer or somewhere else on the computer. It was going to go onto your floppy disk, onto your flash drive, so that when you took out that removable storage and you took it somewhere else, whatever you had saved, you're going to have it and you're going to be able to find it again and open it again when you need it, when you plug that removable storage back into another device. Earlier this year, we, the three of us, read an article in The Verge called File Not Found. And while we were reading and discussing this, we realized that the experiences of the faculty who were documented in this article really mirrored some of our own challenges in working with students on their technology skills. So I, in addition to my MLIS, have a Master's of Education in Instructional Technology. And even during that program, I realized that I had really incorrect assumptions and biases about a universal experience of technology that were just not accurate. I think some of us might have experienced that during the shift to remote. You might have assumed that your students had continual access to stable internet and that they had both a handheld smart device and a computer, not one or the other, or maybe none of those things. So I'd like to share a few moments of my own ignorance when it comes to technology in higher education. So when I was in my instructional technology program, I had a classmate who had experience working as a nurse in rural Kenya. And for one of our projects, we were using her work experience as the context to thinking about ways to deliver nursing education in remote areas. And to me, being a person that has always grown up in the US in a middle-class household in a relatively suburban area that had stable internet, I said, easy, that's fine, webinars. And when I talked to her more about it, that was not actually straightforward or easy at all. At that time, so this is about almost 10 years ago now, the internet was only available in very specific areas of Kenya, and it wasn't always available even if you did have the infrastructure to have the internet in that area. So a person might have to drive several hours to get to a place that had internet, and when they got there, the internet might not actually be working. So now in my position at Penn State, I work as an embedded librarian with World Campus, and you might So world is there in the name, but you still might assume that our students are all in the US and they're connected to, our regular internet infrastructure, that they can access things quickly and easily, but that is not actually the case. So we have students who are on army bases, on maneuvers, and other parts of the world that might not have stable internet. And we also have a lot of places in the United States that don't have stable internet. So if you live in a rural part of the US, it's quite possible that you're not able to get internet at your house, even in parts of Pennsylvania. Fast and reliable internet is not guaranteed, and what is available can be inadequate for video conferencing. So that can make those things hard. I'm actually facing a little internet challenge of my own this afternoon here on my Penn State campus. So we have to remember that it's not universal, and that can really impact your students' ability to fully participate in class activities. Prior to coming to Penn State, I worked at a community college, and one thing that I noticed quite often as I walked around my library would be students were taking essay-based online exams on their smartphones. As someone who is an English major, I cannot imagine typing up a full essay into a smartphone. Thinking about how hard it's going to be to look up literature that you need to cite and do it all properly just from, this tiny screen in your hands. If we assume that our students always have access to a laptop or a desktop computer, we might again be wrong, and we might really harshly judge that student's performance when they were doing the best that they could with the technology that they had available to them. Next slide, Andrea. Okay, so this will be for Carmen's, but I have a little bit more here to do. So one other thing that we have noticed very frequently when we're doing instruction, going back to that floppy disk question, when you are looking for something on the internet and you know that there's this particular website that you want to go to, so something that I can recite in my sleep, libraries.psu.edu, I type that in the address bar. When I try to get my students to do that when I'm doing library instruction, they do not do that. They will Google any word that I said and hope that the first thing that comes up is related to Penn State. One thing that comes up a lot is students will type like PSU libraries. There is Portland State University that sometimes will come up higher than Penn State when students are Googling things related to PSU. One of the things that we want them to think about, and that they aren't really, is that a website address is basically a file path. So maybe that's something that I have, brought down through my historic experience with computers, but I noticed that our students just happen to not use straightforward web addresses. So they use that integrated search functionality and might not get where I was hoping that they would go. It's important to remember that we have to interrogate our assumptions about why students might not know how to do something. So what we learned in the Verge article is that those who started using technology at a certain point, especially as we become more reliant on the cloud, have a very different experience of how things are saved and found on a computer. I have a background in graphic design, and if you do as well, you might be aware that the software used to develop print publications, specifically Adobe InDesign, has a reliance on very specific file paths to reproduce your high quality images. If I didn't have that experience, I might not think that file paths are very important either, especially if I'm more used to using a general software that allows you to just copy and paste images, and I'm not really worried about the image quality. The copy-paste experience is much more common than everyone having experience with Adobe InDesign. Similarly, as a business librarian, I'm used to dealing with large corporate documents. So I saw someone put in the chat that they might have been looking at the corporate report for Post Holdings. So you probably got like 100+ page document. When we're using those, we use Control F. So maybe you did a Control F for Premier Protein to browse through that annual report to make sure that content that we need is actually in that document before we spend a lot of time scrolling and scrolling and scrolling. It's a function that I've noticed a lot of students aren't aware of, even though it's something that could save them both time and frustration. I think it's important to share with students the reason why we want them to learn a new skill. So a little shortcut there. Usually it's going to save them time. You don't want to spend a lot of time reading something that isn't useful if a small skill could help ensure that it's relevant before you dig in. It's the same way I try to frame citations now when I'm doing that in my instruction. It's a tool that will help others learn more about your topic, not a punishment to make sure that you're doing enough work. So if you'd like in the chat, you can share, if you're comfortable, some incorrect assumptions that you've made about students and technology and how you adapted your instruction to rectify those. And while you're thinking about that, I'm going to turn it over to Carmen.
Thanks, Emily. So as Emily mentioned, the Verge article that we read called File Not Found inspired us to start thinking about the computing and digital literacy skills of our students. So in short, the article provides anecdotes from various STEM professors about noticing the lack of computing competency in meeting many of their students. So for example, when asked to find files, students didn't understand what the professor meant. They would use a search function to find a file rather than navigating to the actual folder where the file was stored. So a lot of that article describes the different techniques professors use to teach their students basic computing and digital literacy skills. One professor even recorded a 2-hour video walking students through the basics of how their computers are set up. Another analogy that I found interesting in the article was that of students thinking of their computers as a giant pile of laundry. And by using the search function to retrieve files, instead of knowing where they are located, they are directing a robot to retrieve the exact item of clothing from the massive pile. So the professors concluded that using a mental map to retrieve files isn't necessarily a bad thing, and is definitely an evolution in the way people navigate their computing environments. However, the disconnect comes when the professors and their students aren't using the same terminologies and concepts. So Robinson and Johnson's article, The Process and Effective Environment of Students' Personal Information Management, discusses personal information management, or PIM, and outline the 4 key activities of that process. So it's gathering, organizing, retrieval, and maintenance. The authors note that one problem is knowing what has been collected or saved, as the items are generally scattered throughout a personal archive, such as in bookmark materials on different websites, email, files, etc. Yaffe et al. In the Yaffe et al. Article, Students' Organization Strategies of PIM. It is integral, they note, it's an integral and central part of the learning process to do so. And naming a new file, grouping files together, categorizing them under a new folder name, and classifying new files into existing folders, it involves a constructive cognitive process. And then we're targeted to our field, library science, and Stewart and Basics information encountering and management in information literacy instruction of undergraduate students. They note how our information literacy standards, so meeting the ACRL framework, does not refer to the skills needed to organize and store documents and other information resources. The authors conducted a study involving the information encountering experiences of undergraduate students and the potential role of personal information collection, management, and retrieval in information literacy instruction. Undergraduate students enrolled in an information literacy course were surveyed regarding their experiences online with information encountering and personal information management. And the study indicated that most of the undergraduate students frequently encountered unexpected information while online, but they weren't capturing that information for future use using built-in web-based tools. All right, could I have the next slide, please? All right, so kind of going off of that, over the years, like Emily, like Andrea, I have noticed that students sometimes have difficulty with completing basic computing tasks. So, you know, like Emily, I admit, I also assume digital literacy competency, given that many students grew up in a ubiquitous computing environment. So here's a few examples of my incorrect assumptions. So one of the most basic skills I have seen some students struggle with, not only in the classroom, but in computing workshops, is file retrieval. So similar to the Verge article. When asked to download the PDF of an article, for example, students may not understand where the article went after completing the download process. And also when students have come to my office for research consultations, and then they present me with their desktop screen on their laptops, the number of files and documents and flotsam and jetsam, if you will, littering the space is really alarming sometimes. Again, I know that people organize differently, and some can use sort of a mental map to sift through the proverbial laundry pile. However, it's been my experience that it takes them, more time to find a document. And along that same line, I have had the experience in graduate level courses in which I introduced the citation management tool, Zotero. So students are confused as to how to organize the files in their system. And so typically users will have sort of like a master web library that they can break down into smaller, more organized libraries. So for example, I have sub-libraries for resources relating to research projects. Grad students may benefit from organizing their dissertation materials by creating chapter libraries. The last time I taught one of these sessions, I had a student come up to me afterwards and show me their newly created Zotero web library. Then they asked, but how do I organize it? Where do I put things? My incorrect assumption when creating my lesson plan is that students would intuitively understand how to organize their materials. I also developed and managed a series of basic web programming workshops called Code for Her for 2 years. And once we had chosen the participants from an application pool, we would send all those participants an introductory email instructing them on how to download Microsoft Visual Studio to use as their programming environment. So as we went along, we had to make those instructions more and more specific each semester. Participants expressed having difficulty with, again, knowing where the files went once downloaded and not being able to retrieve the program when we would begin each session. So we had to demonstrate how to pin the program to your taskbar or dock and let them know that, placing the program on their actual desktop may be a good place for easy access. And we also had to instruct many participants on how to unzip a file. So before a particular workshop started, participants were instructed to retrieve a package of files from our GitHub site. And again, we encountered the, I don't know how to do this, I don't know where the files went, kind of problems. And we had to take a step back and demonstrate those skills. And in addition to providing help for downloading our programming environment, we created a file path activity for all the participants. So for those of you not familiar with programming, knowing where your work is in your directory is essential to creating some elements of a program and then getting that program to actually run. So file path navigation is something that people are usually not trained to do, especially nowadays. So clear instructions are typically needed, and the activity helped participants to be more comfortable with the concepts. I'll turn it over to Emily.
Thanks, Carmen. And maybe that real life file path issue is when you get that 404 file not found. You are literally experiencing a file path error. So at Penn State, many of our librarians interact with students through digital badges, which are different series of online activities that can be embedded into a course to help the students learn library skills that they're going to need to be successful in that class. So I mentioned earlier, I'm an embedded librarian for World Campus. A lot of World Campus classes have these badges as a way to kind of teach those skills, but we still make many assumptions about the technology skills that we think students might have, but that they actually don't. So something that I somewhat frequently encounter when I've graded badges are gaps in those technology skills that we have incorrectly assumed to be universal. And an example of one of those skill gaps is on this slide. In this particular exercise, we asked the students to search in Lion Search, or it's our Summon product, if that's something that you have at your campus, take a screenshot of the results for their search, and then upload that image into our badge platform for evaluation. So as you can see here, do you think this student took a screenshot? They did not. They took out their smartphone, they took a picture of their search results, and then they had to save and upload the picture that they took with their phone into our badging platform. So there could be a number of reasons why the student did this, and they did find a way to make the assignment work for them. So this is not, telling the student that they're bad or that they're wrong. They found a way around a skill gap or an issue that they had, but they probably had to work a lot harder to do this than if they did Command-Shift-3, if they're a Mac user, or print screen and paste, if they're a PC user. And if they had known how to do those things, it might have saved them some time. And honestly, they would have saved me some time, because when they do the assignment the way that we were hoping that they would do it, I can see everything directly in the badging interface, and it saves me a few seconds. And we get hundreds and hundreds of those badge steps every single month or day, depending on how many people are using badging. So if I have to pause and download materials for each step, because that's what I have to do when someone uploads a picture like this, I have to download it, I have to open it, that adds up, and it takes a lot of my time too. So when we are doing these badges, we don't really give students an overview of the technology skills that they're going to need to complete the badge. We've been more focused on the library skills, the higher level, the ACRL framework level kind of issues that Carmen was talking about in her section, as opposed to maybe the more standards, the pre-framework issues that would help students maybe be a little bit more successful. So we think that those skills that they should have, that we assume that they should have, would be easily transferable to our platform when they might not be. So I think it would be easier to revise our badging instructions to list the particular technology skills that are needed to complete the badge and provide tutorials on how to do those tasks. Another option could be for the grader, when we can leave feedback when we're grading, to leave a quick note in the comments for the student about how to complete this skill in the future, because it's something that will likely help them be successful in their other classes. And we do have some other Penn State colleagues that have developed a program called Tech Academy that helps students to build some of these skills as they are entering their first semester of college. And as I mentioned, when students have these skills, it saves us time when we're working with them. So it might be worth it to, at the start of your lesson, talk about these are the particular technology skills we're going to do in this class. Polling them might not be great, because nobody really wants to raise their hand and say, I don't know how to do this. But if you have, quick link to tutorials or other things, or as you're, hopefully having the time to browse through the classroom, if you can see things that are not going the way that you thought they would be going, to just stop and help someone quickly. So I'm going to turn this over to Andrea.
Great, thanks, Emily. So in addition to being the STEM librarian here at Penn State Harrisburg, I'm also the data and collections coordinator. And since I've joined the team at Harrisburg, I have been developing and offering research data management workshops for our campus community. And originally, I created these with the, they're geared primarily toward our STEM graduate students and faculty. So a large majority of the group that I serve here on campus. And with the goal of enhancing their research data management practices and data and digital literacy. So my biggest assumption when I started this and I created these workshops was that I assumed that graduate students and certainly faculty researchers who have been in their profession for several years, I assumed, would have more advanced knowledge of this. So I'm not working or speaking directly about undergraduate students here, but once I offered my first RDM or research data management workshop, it was clear that my assumptions were quite incorrect. And to build on what Carmen and Emily both said earlier, I found that graduate students really lacked useful file organization. And so what I mean is in terms of my workshops is that they did not have any clear or very few clear naming conventions for their own data. So data that they've collected on their own or that they've gathered with their research faculty, their advisor in their classes or in their labs. And they had no defined folder structure for their data. And only one student in my first workshop asked or understood what I meant when I said version control. So I asked the students to locate their data files when they're working on a project. And one student said that they didn't know where their data files were. They just used the search feature on their computer to try to find the file that they want with whatever name they gave it. And this is just like the Verge article we referenced earlier in the presentation. And when I asked a few of the grad students about their naming conventions or the lack thereof, a few students said they didn't, or they understood why a clear naming convention would be beneficial, but they don't really think of it when it's their own work, right? So they didn't have any plans to share their data openly. So why would a naming convention matter for them? And I was recently talking with a faculty member who mentioned that students in her small biology lab group here on campus lacked this file naming and organization understanding too. And this was a clear issue for the faculty members, since an important file could be lost if it was not saved in the right place with the right name. And if any of you here, attendees during the presentation, you work with perhaps science researchers or any researcher that's doing a lot of big data work, that can be really stressful if they can't find the file that they need when they need it. In another workshop, I talk about the topic of data transformation. And if you're not aware, or if you're not familiar with this, data transformation is the process of converting data from one format or structure to another. So data wrangling, gathering, selecting, and manipulating data to answer their specific analytical questions. This often involves data transformation. So I remind the students that they know their data better than I do, and they know what will make their data valuable. And to do so, they may want to change it in some way. Perhaps by filtering it, merging it, deleting it, and cleaning it up, whatever their intention is. And a quick and what I thought basic example of this that I give to the students in the workshop is transforming their data from something like an Excel workbook file, so a .xlsx file, into a comma separated values file or a .csv file. And the CSV file may be, required to import into software such as R, or transforming their data and whatever file type it is into an SPSS file if they need it to do some, analyzing in a different software program. So some students understood that, and others were confused as to why they would need something like a different file type for a different software format, that type of thing. And there were several students who did not understand, like I said, or even, and I believe Carmen referenced this earlier as well, how to transform data from something like a Google Doc or a Word doc into a PDF format. And lastly, with these RDM workshops, I aim to increase our student researchers and our faculty researchers' data literacy, so a component of digital literacy. And one piece of this is having the students document and describe their data. So again, I always tell them they know their data better than I know their data, and they come to these workshops with their own data already gathered, or someone else's pre-existing data. And I assume that they would know how to document and describe their data to make it reusable if necessary. So we have a conversation about documenting data at the study and project level. And this is often discussions I have about research design, their data collection methods, or at the data level. So the exact description of their variables or codes that they've used or created for their project. And student responses during these workshops have been along the lines of, yeah, I know all of this information and how to describe my data, but it's all in my head. Or I had a few students say, I have this information, but it's written down on a different notebook or different sheets of paper that I keep, at my apartment or in my dorm or in the lab, and I don't have access to that. So depending upon the size of their research project, that may be fine, keeping paper copies, but it's less than ideal, in my opinion, especially if they're working with large quantities of data or really, in-depth specific types of data. So a few graduate students said that they weren't really practicing these behaviors because no one will want to use my data anyway. And responses like that have allowed me to have broader data conversations and digital literacy conversations with students to hopefully help them realize that this could be beneficial to understand the larger picture of their own work and their digital literacy skills later. So my assumptions stem from my personal experiences. I had previous knowledge of these topics and activities from my relatively recent undergraduate and graduate schoolwork, all based in the United States. And similar to how Emily mentioned earlier, a fair number of the STEM graduate students that I work with are international students who may have never experienced or been exposed to large research libraries like ours at Penn State. let alone any type of digital literacy practices in their home countries or during their own schooling. So some of the graduate students are also older than the typical college student age, and they've been away from higher education for several years. These students shared that they don't often have the opportunity to use these skills at their current full-time jobs. So after conversations with these students who participate in the workshops, it became clear that I needed to scaffold my approach to meet our students' needs in these classes. So Carmen, Emily, and I have designed our final of 3 Padlets that you will see the link here on the slide and the QR code. And Emily or Carmen can also copy and paste the link into the chat. But as our wrap up activity, and you can feel free to type questions in, we are asking any attendees here, what ideas do you have for improving the digital literacy skills for your students? Similar to the other 2 Padlets, the responses should be anonymous. You can use the plus button under the questions or in this individual Padlet to respond to us. And we'll give you, I think we have about 15 minutes left, so we'll give you a minute or 2 to feel free. Please enter your responses in the Padlet, and then we can talk through those just like we did the other 2. And while you're doing that, if you have questions for us, please feel free to leave them in the chat. I'm going to stop my share just to make sure that everyone can see the Padlet and it's working fine. Hopefully I don't have any tech issues there.
And I typed a short response to David's question there. Like, yeah, I don't know how my car works. I was just reflecting yesterday as I was scanning something that I don't actually really know how like a photocopier works when it comes down to it, other than I put the thing in, I press the button and it sends it to my computer. But in this particular case, a lot of us are working, both Andrea, I and Carmen are working with students where coding is actually going to become part of the job or career that they want to have, even if it's not like to be a computer programmer. So knowing how these things work actually is really important to what they hope to do in the future, or something that will make them more marketable in their career field. So, you know, if they have lab skills, that's great. But if they have lab skills plus the ability to use statistical data software, that might help them even more than someone who knows how to, you know, follow proper laboratory procedures. And, you know, in my example, you really need to know how to use file paths for certain design software as well. So I also try to frame it in saving them time and saving them effort, because that tends to be one way to get people's attention if they're used to something being really obnoxious and taking a really long time. And, you know, kind of when we teach them that they need to read the abstract before they decide to like download a whole article, especially at Penn State now, where you have to pay per page for your printing. You don't want to print off an article that ends up not being something that you wanted. It helps to know kind of these shortcuts to make sure that in the grand scheme of the universe, you are not wasting 5 cents per page on something that you don't need.
I also think too, like, just the downloading issues that we have witnessed, experienced ourselves, whatever. I mean, again, like, I think it's at least a little relevant to teach them the very basics about, you know, file management. So for example, if we're in a class, we're teaching, and, you know, a student downloads an article that they found, they really like it. Where did that file go? It might not go directly to their downloads. They may have like a setting, you know, marked where it goes to their desktop, or it goes to something that has a really long file path, and then they can't find it again. So it could behoove the student, you know, to create a specific folder to download things into, like articles. So I think that's why that's important, David.
I love the comment here about framing file management as an anxiety reducing practice. That is awesome. And I think that that is a really awesome way to frame it when we're talking to students. You know, you can be organized and calm, or at least calmer, because you know where all of your files are, and that you can call them up very quickly when you need them without having to rely on your robot to go find them.
Which is particularly important for graduate students, especially students doing a PhD, because think of how much literature they're often working with.
Yeah, these are great responses that folks, and we really appreciate you adding your ideas into the Padlet. So I hope you can all see this, and these links will be available if you want to take some of the ideas on your own and implement them in your class or in any of your library sessions. But I also particularly like this comment that after working in K through 12 for many years, you've seen the digital divide across Pennsylvania. And first, it's important to note that not a lot of the students in our classroom right in front of us that day have had stable internet access, or those who didn't have an Apple one-to-one program in their high school. I know when I was going through elementary school, middle school, high school, right, computers were coming onto the scene, but they weren't giving them to us personally. But my cousins who also lived in Pennsylvania, although hours away from me, few years younger than me, they were given like full Chromebooks or iPads at the time that they had with them for all of their school years, and then they could keep them afterwards or purchase them from the school, something like that. So advocating for student access to desktops on campus is a really great idea as well. And then what I see in the middle of my screen, I don't know if it's the middle for everyone else, but the spending time updating our own experience with these devices that the students are using. And that's great because there's a comment deeper on or another response there. In our library instruction space, our main space here at Harrisburg, the podium computer that we use to present is a touch screen. And I was in class and was just kind of moving the monitor and I had no idea it was a touch screen. So then it kind of shook up my screen in front of the class and it wasn't anything bad. It was just going to a different page, but I was getting all flustered. Oh, if I had paid attention and know that was a touch screen, maybe I would have avoided that issue. So these are really great. And we have a few suggestions. I'm going to leave this screen up so you can feel free to keep typing or reviewing other folks. And again, we encourage you to ask questions in the chat we can answer before we wrap up in a few minutes. But first, we would encourage you to not assume competency with digital literacy skills. And as you saw, our assumptions often fell short. Consider the previous experiences of your students. Where are they from? What resources have they had access to? Do they have access to those same resources now? For my research data management workshops now, I always ask up front what they think research data management means so that I can have a shared terminology with my students and faculty before beginning my session. We also suggest that when you're instructing students to perform a task, that you demonstrate and provide clear instructions on how to do this. This will avoid confusion and frustration experienced by both the students and the instructor. And we found that tasks that we consider simple or basic are not always simple or basic for our students. So I'm sure we've all experienced reading through poorly outlined instructions in our past. And that's what I realized when I was teaching my sessions is I needed to be way more specific than I was being. And we would additionally love to see more instructors incorporating digital literacy learning objectives into your own instruction. So the more opportunities for students to practice and learn these skills, the better. And lastly, we would really suggest that instructors add a list of digital skills and software knowledge that would be required for the class or the course, and provide a list of these resources to help students build those skills. So here at Penn State, we have access to LinkedIn Learning, which was formerly lynda.com, if you're familiar with that. We could provide links to that within our workshop slides, or if you're a professor, as a faculty member or an instructor, linking these on your syllabus so that students have access to them outside of class if they need it, as well as books from your library, if they can be helpful in enhancing these skills for students. Your favorite library database or external resource that you think would be beneficial for them. And I think that's all we have. So thank you so much everyone for attending. We welcome your questions. I don't know if there are any questions in the chat, but what I will do here is, let me get back to share my screen. We have a slide with all of our contact information, and we welcome and invite you to please reach out to us if you have questions. Again, outside, I know we're getting close to our 3 p.m. time, but thank you very much. And Carmen, Emily, I don't have the Zoom pulled up, so if there are any chat questions, please let me know.
Just lots of thank yous. Okay, we have one from Angela. Angela asks, do you have any tips or suggestions on how to work with the teaching instructor to make them more aware of these digital literacy challenges? I think it's easier so in my case with like World Campus, I actually do see assignments and grade specific assignments that are coming in. So I can pinpoint, oh, hey, this is not working the way that we thought it was going to work. And here's what we can do to triage it now. And then here's how I'm going to change these assignments for next semester to try to fix that problem. So I always really try to iterate, but I am privileged in the fact that like I can actually see graded items that students are turning in. I think if you do have, a pretty good collegial relationship with the faculty that you're working with, hopefully if you're doing, any kind of pre or post instruction consultation with them, that's something that you could bring up to say like, oh, I really noticed that students were struggling with this. Have we thought about, changing the assignment this way or something like that? Or just asking them, what problems are you noticing that the students are having, or what challenges are they having? I've had a lot more people in the last year or so, since we kind of came back to campus full time, reaching out to me a lot about citations and citation management, more so than in the pre-pandemic time. And I'm not really sure exactly why that happened, but I tried to be much more explicit about it in my instruction based on the feedback that I got from the instructors and using the library tools that we have. So we have some modules from Credo reference that we can use with examples that I could use as a class activity of like how to fix the citations. And then, as I mentioned at the beginning of our session, framing citation more as like a discovery process than a work in punishment process. I think really framing it towards students from a skills perspective and like a value added perspective rather than a deficit or a drudgery kind of perspective as they might often see it.
So I know some folks might need to head out, but I just wanted to make sure to put the evaluation link in the chat. We can certainly keep taking questions. It's important that you take the time to fill out the evaluation form because we do need to submit evaluation data for our LSTA grant. So just want to make sure to put that out there. Again, before people head out, I also want to make sure to thank Carmen, Emily, and Andrea for presenting to us. As a reminder, this recording is going to be available to PALA members early next week and on the YouTube channel in case you have people you want to share this with. If you're not a PALA member and you're interested in becoming a member, I'm going to put my email in the chat box. And if you have any suggestions for future discussions or presentations, I'm also going to feel free to contact me as well, and I'll make sure to pass that along. But just want to make sure to get that in there. Other questions, feel free to put in the chat box.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much. And thank you, Amy and Chrissy, for helping us during the session. So we appreciate it.